This is your 91.3 FM 3030 Sports Update. The New York Rangers avoided getting swept by the Boston Bruins, winning 4-3 in overtime. Chris Kreider scored the game winner, and Henrik Lundqvist had 37 saves. The Red Wings shut out the Blackhawks 2-0 to take a 3-1 series lead, and the Kings blanked the Sharks 3-0 to take a 3-2 series lead. For tonight, there's just one NHL game. The Penguins hold a 3-1 series lead over the Senators. In the NBA, there were no games yesterday, but tonight is Game 2 of the Heat and Pacers. The Heat took the first game, winning 103-102 in overtime. Game 3 of the Spurs-Grizzlies series will be on Saturday. In league news, Boston Celtics President of Operations Danny Ainge denied the Brooklyn Nets permission to speak to Doc Rivers about their vacant head coaching position. In the MLB, there were just 5 games yesterday. The Indians defeated the Red Sox 12-3, and manager Terry Francona's return to Fenway. The Pirates beat the Cubs 4-2 and are now on a 4-game win streak. The Blue Jays beat the Orioles 12-6 despite Chris Davis hitting his league-leading 15th home run. The Tigers beat the Twins 7-6, and the Angels beat the Royals 5-4. Joe Blanton got his first win after beginning the season 0-7. I'm AJ Speier. This has been your 3030 Sports Update on 91.3 FM WBNY.
And now, the Sports Reporters Radio Show on WBNY.
Our goals were to win an NBA title, and we played like it throughout the season. We were able to win our division and, had a lot of individual accomplishments on our ball club, but at the end of the day, we didn't get it done. And, me being the head coach is, I take full responsibility of that.
I want to retire, Nick. I don't want to go anywhere else. I love it here. I love my teammates. I love my coaches. I was sitting in the locker room looking at my jersey after the game, just knowing that I don't want to be anywhere else but in the orange and blue, so we'll see.
And we're live here at the Union Sports Reporters Radio Show. I'm the host, AJ Speier, alongside Aubrey Gibert, talking about the New York Knicks and how their season fell short against the Indiana Pacers in Game 6. Obviously, the Pacers going on to face the Heat. They lost Game 1 in overtime over there. But we're talking about the New York Knicks now. What went wrong for this team? We're going to debate that coming up on our show. We're also going to talk about what they can do to improve and possibly make it to the conference finals. And obviously, you have J.R. Smith, who has a player option. He's likely going to opt out of that. You have Amari Stoudemire and his huge contract. What should the Knicks do with both those players? But let's start off with what went wrong with the New York Knicks. And I think the biggest weakness that was identified in this postseason was Raymond Felton. You saw him going against a 6'4" point guard in George Hill, and with the exception of the game that he wasn't able to play Hill, Felton really wasn't much of a factor in this, and you saw it being the big difference between the Boston Celtics series and the Indiana Pacers series.
Yeah, I will have to agree with you on that in terms of he definitely was one of the weak spots for the Knicks in that Indiana Pacers series. I don't think he was the biggest reason why they lost. I think the biggest reason simply was they just couldn't make shots, and they had, unlike Indiana, they have no presence down low that can score. And it just puts so much pressure on. Let's face it, the Knicks were a jump shooting team. They don't have, similar to OKC, they don't really have a dominant guy down low who can back you down. They have Ibaka, but he's not really a back you down kind of guy. He's a face up guy. And the Knicks don't have that back you down guy, get you 2 points, get you a foul, double team, pass out. They had that in Stoudemire before he got hurt. He was thriving, but you couldn't ask him to come back and just be that effective right when the playoffs started, when he came back right then and there. He didn't have any time to really adjust, to really get into the feel. And I honestly didn't say this to you, but I really think that something was wrong with Chandler because he did not look 100% out there. I mean, we know he's not going to score, obviously, so I'm not expecting a lot of points from him, but his defense did it. I mean, I've seen him lock down Hibbert numerous amount of times. And while Hibbert didn't necessarily score that much, he made his presence on the defensive side of the court, on the shot blocking and everything. But I don't see why Chandler couldn't have done the same exact thing. And I feel like he just really struggled versus Hibbert. And that was a position where, in my opinion, I didn't expect Hibbert to dominate that matchup.
Well, the thing with Tyson Chandler as far as offensively this season, his success has come from the pick and roll, which was negated away because George Hill was guarding Raymond Felton, and they really couldn't get it going. You obviously had the 7'2" guy in the middle there, and you also had David West, of course. So it really presented problems for him on the offensive side of the ball. But you look over at the defense side of the ball, I mean, they had, as I mentioned, David West. You had, obviously, Roy Hibbert. You also had Paul George. All those guys really get to the basket. They were giving Lance Stevenson a bunch of layups in Game 6 there. But the thing I really noticed about this series between the Pacers and the Knicks was the Knicks basically relied on Carmelo Anthony, and maybe another player would step up. You look over at the Indiana Pacers, it was a different scorer every night. In Game 1, it was DJ Augustine, and then you had Roy Hibbert in Game 2. You had Stevenson, obviously, in Game 6. So it was a bunch of different players for this Pacers team, which the Knicks didn't exactly have. It was pretty much rely on Melo. And I'm glad you mentioned the Oklahoma City Thunder with their problems, because once Russell Westbrook ended up being hurt, they would rely on Kevin Durant, and in the fourth quarter, he didn't show up and made some bad shots. So when I look over at the Knicks, and this is why I brought up the Raymond Felton point, because you saw what happened to Durant without a point guard, and you saw what happened to Anthony in this series. I don't think Raymond Felton is the right choice. Remember last year, the Knicks were going after Jeremy Lin or trying to retain him. Obviously, the Houston Rockets put that poison pill in the contract, and they couldn't bring him back. I still think it was the right decision to move with Felton because it was cheaper, but I feel like the Knicks need to make a better decision going forward as far as who their point guard is going to be. Away from the radio show, you and I were both talking about the possibility of CP3 coming here, Chris Paul. I just don't see it happening. The Knicks are already over the cap as it is, and they have to pay a luxury tax. Unless they can somehow get rid of Tyson Chandler or Amari Stoudemire's contract, I just don't see it happening. Apparently, though, there's a rumor going around that the Knicks are going to trade Tyson Chandler.
Yeah, I heard a couple rumors floating out there about him. Me personally, I've come to the point now where, obviously, like most Knicks fans, I want Stoudemire gone because of his $21.6 million contract for a guy who can't even stay healthy. But the reality is he's most likely not going to be gone. He's I think $45 million over the next 2 years. No team is going to take on that contract for somebody whose knees just won't allow him to play a full season. He's going to be on a minute limit for probably the rest of his career. At 30 years old, that's a poison pill right there. So when I look at Chandler, guy's making $14 million, he doesn't score. And I feel like you can't pay somebody that much just to play defense. I mean, if you look at Hibbert, he's great defensively, but he can get you some points down low. And Chandler cannot create his own shot. Now, previous to the season starting, he was supposed to, just like Amari, go down and work with Akeem Olajuwon on his post game. But since he was in the Olympics, he really had no time to really rest before the season, so he forewent that. And I know Woodson has came out and said recently that he wants Chandler to beef up and, work on his post game down low. And if he can do that, then maybe I wouldn't have a problem with him. But you can't pay somebody $14 million off a guy who's just going to get you putbacks. No, don't get me wrong. He's very important to this team. But if I can get another center who can at least give me a little bit of offense, a little bit of defense, rather than just all defense, I'll take that. So, I mean, personally, I wouldn't mind if they went out and looked to trade him. I know we talked about Chris Paul. The thing with Chris Paul, my thing with him is, he really has the say in where he goes. I think that if he really wants to come to New York, he has to force it. He's got to. He's got to go to L.A. front office and say, I want to go to the Knicks. Because when you do that, it's like the Carmelo Anthony case. When Carmelo said he wanted to come to the Knicks, it really left the Knicks in limbo because it was a situation where they knew he wanted them, and Denver knew that he only would go to New York. So New York had to give up all those players because they knew that they wouldn't get Carmelo Anthony if it wasn't for getting all those players. So I think in terms of Chris Paul, if he goes to L.A. front office and say, I want to go to New York, I think it allows the Knicks to, maybe throw in a Amari Stoudemire or a Tyson Chandler, somebody that the Clippers wouldn't originally take, but they will have to because they don't want to lose him straight up in free agency. So you have to give something in return. So you can get rid of at least one of those two. You're going to probably have to give up Raymond Felton. Obviously, the other big name that's been rumored for the last 2 years, is Iman Shumpert, who I just told you previously, I think he should be untouchable. But depending on what you give up, I would consider it for Chris Paul, only because Carmelo wants Chris Paul. He's the best point guard in the league. And if you put him and Carmelo together and then maybe keep Chandler or Stoudemire, one of those two, and then maybe you have a chance to possibly get over the Heat. But you have to have at least, I think you have to have Iman Shumpert. You have to have either Iman Shumpert or J.R. Smith. You can't give up both of them. You have to at least keep one of them. If it was my choice, I would keep Shumpert and get rid of J.R. But I really think Chris Paul has to really force himself out of L.A. in order to come to the Knicks, and because we can only get him through a sign and trade because we have no salary cap.
Well, the interesting thing about J.R. Smith is that he has a player option, as I mentioned, $2.9 million, which he's going to decline more than likely because he wants to be a Knick for life. So he's going to try to re-sign with them. The question is, how much can the Knicks really pay him? Because right now, as I mentioned, they're over the cap.
They have the early bird rights. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. It's a thing where if you've been with the team for a certain amount of years, you can give them, I believe, they can give him $5 to $6 million a year without it going against the salary cap.
Yeah, but do you feel like he can get more in the market elsewhere?
Yeah. I definitely think that he can. The thing is, will a team trust him? Obviously we know all the antics that went along with JR this postseason, the Rihanna thing going out, the flu, the hungover, all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't want to sound repetitive, but when I say this, but we all know that J.R. Smith is one of the most athletic players in the NBA, and he's one of the most talented players in the NBA. But he doesn't put it all together. He doesn't have his mindset. I thought that his mindset was there. I mean, we came on the show last year, I think, at this time, and JR came out and said pretty much, I was partying last season. This year I'm serious. And we believed him. And then you pull this stunt in the playoffs. Well, in the playoff time, not regular season time, playoff time, you're going out and getting drunk.
He had been having success at that point during the season, and he credited to the fact that he has been more sober, but obviously he had some alcohol addiction problems still, and he had to go back to the alcohol, and as you saw, the result of his performance just didn't work out. But as far as what the Knicks can really do to improve their team going forward, I think you have to go with J.R. Smith because he's the best option you can get at an affordable price. Obviously, I would take a shooter like Kevin Martin possibly if you can get him cheaper, but I don't think he's going to come cheaply. So you have J.R. Smith coming back possibly, and then as we mentioned, it's going to have to be Stoudemire or Chandler who has to get traded. A team's going to have to want to take on that kind of contract. I found 3 teams who might be the ideal suitors for one of those two players. The Utah Jazz, they're going to be without Paul Millsap and Al Jefferson, both the free agents. Philadelphia, who traded for Andrew Bynum this past season, he's not there. Spencer Hawes can play power forward, so they can always add a center there. And also the Atlanta Hawks, who are not going to be without Josh Smith. Al Horford's more of a natural power forward anyway, so you never know going forward if the Knicks could possibly make a deal with those teams to free up some space and go after CP3.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Changes have to be made. Will we expect big changes? Probably not, like you said, because of the salary cap. But let me say this also. Moves have to be made. Let me tell you why right here. Plain and simple. The Celtics will have Rondo back, who was out for the playoffs. If he plays, the Knicks might not even get out of the first round, to be honest with you. Put that out there. There is...
Yeah, but the thing is with Celtics, you don't know if Paul Pierce is
Derrick Rose is coming back for the Bulls.
You don't know if Paul Pierce is going to be back, though, for Boston.
Yeah.
He has a player option, and I got a feeling he might actually go to Los Angeles if they can't get Dwight Howard.
The Lakers or the Clippers? Lakers?
Lakers.
That would be interesting to see with Kobe. They need a point guard, though, to even get those guys the ball.
Steve Nash.
If he can stay healthy. If he's healthy.
You have him. Gasol can possibly play center, and then you can get a power forward then. And I think Paul Pierce will actually come cheaper possibly in L.A., and he obviously wants to win another championship, but the idea of playing with Kobe Bryant for Paul Pierce, I mean, both of them would have better shots selections going forward.
Yeah. That would be really interesting to see. We'll see if Kobe can return for the start of the season. It's obviously up for question right now. I think he'll be back because Kobe Bryant defeats all the odds. Going back to the other reason, Derrick Rose is going to be back for the Bulls. They're going to be already better than what they were. So, and if you really realize, look at that. Those are 2 teams that are below the Knicks with those guys out. So those teams are going to come back even better next year. Maybe not so much Boston, depending on what moves they make this offseason. But Chicago's going to be better.
Yeah, Chicago.
Let's be honest. Chicago's going to be better. Even if they get rid of Luol Deng, to get Derrick Rose back, probably easily a top 10 player in the league. That's going to push them over. If the Knicks keep this roster they have right now, and the Bulls get Rose back, they're automatically the second best team in the East. And the Knicks are 3 or 4 or 5 at best because as we just finished, Raymond Felton cannot match up with Derrick Rose. Let's be honest here. You can't match up, and
point guard.
You can't do it. Honestly, my personal opinion, the Knicks need to get a second superstar.
I want Jose. I want Jose Calderon if we can get him as his point guard in New York.
But he's not good defensively. You need to get a bigger point guard. Is what you need. A bigger guy who can dish and can score and won't disappear. Because Raymond Felton, let's be honest, he disappeared in Game 6. I think he was 0 of 8 from the field.
He pretty much disappeared the entire series. It was just the only game that George Hill didn't play that he really showed up. And there's really not there any great options for point guards. I mean, another guy who we've mentioned in the past is Jarrett Jack, who's going to be a free agent. I don't know if you want him to start at point guard, though. I mean, we saw what he did in Golden State, but again, he was on the floor at the same time as Stephon Curry, and teams weren't really focusing on Jarrett Jack.
He's more of a shooter. He's not really a point guard, I don't think, personally.
So we saw what happened last time we had Chauncey Billups in New York.
Yeah, there's actually a Bleacher Report out today saying that those two players are two players the Knicks should avoid. So I don't think they're going to go after either of those two. They obviously made the wrong decision in amnestying Billups, and they should have amnestied Stoudemire. And we would probably still be talking about the Knicks in the playoffs right now because they wouldn't even have to worry about him. But let me kind of switch it up more. Let me ask you this: we've been talking about players. How much of the blame do you put on Mike Woodson as a coach about what happened this postseason? Because me personally, he gets 70% of the blame. That's my opinion. He gets more than half.
Well, the whole strategy that we saw during the regular season that worked was that they were using this San Antonio Spurs philosophy of ball movement and getting to their shooters more. In the first game, I noticed they were trying to do some more ISO situations with Melo, and it didn't really work out. So they got to figure out what they want to do going forward, obviously. Jason Kidd is a guy who didn't make a single shot during that series, which is a huge problem. He's going to be making $3 million. You have to wonder whether or not they're going to want to bring him back next year. Pablo Prigioni, he's a guy who is in his late 30s now. He's a guy who likes to pass the ball a lot, which is great for the team. He doesn't take enough shots, though, which is what you'd like to see from him. If you're wide open, take the shot. And Iman Shumpert, he's a guy who we've seen progress from year 1 to year 2. Obviously, now he'll be more comfortable with his knee injury going forward. The question is whether or not he can develop into a scorer or if he's just merely a Tony Allen kind of defensive player. And as we mentioned, Stoudemire is the biggest question on this team. When the Knicks had success, they were hitting three-pointers. They set the record for most three-pointers in the season.
Yep.
With Stoudemire on the floor, you're not shooting three-pointers. And you have to wonder who we can play on the court with. Because when the Knicks first put Stoudemire back on the floor in Game 3, he wasn't with Melo or Tyson Chandler on the floor. And when they both came in, he wasn't having much success either. So they have to figure out going forward, is Stoudemire a backup? Is he going to be a $21.7 million backup?
That's what it's looking like. He did it last season. And I think Woodson, I know Stoudemire came out recently and said that, the trio of him, Chandler, and Melo really has not been given a chance to thrive. I know when the first year, because it's the simple fact that Stoudemire can't stay healthy. They can't work it out because he can't even be on the court long enough. But I think that Woodson has seen enough where he realizes that they both need the ball in their hands to be successful, and they can't do that when they're both on the court. Personally, I think that Carmelo deferred to Amari a lot this year to try to get some of the national attention off him, saying that he couldn't play with him. And I think it was to the point where it was taken away from his game, because if you're worried about getting somebody else the ball, instead of just working in the flow of the offense, it hurts you as a player. But I commend Carmelo for doing so. But I think Woodson, I think you have to, if you're going to keep Stoudemire, you have to somehow get them to be on the court together. You have to, because it makes it more dangerous, because you have an inside and outside, because they both can hit the 15-foot shot. Carmelo can hit three-point shots. Stoudemire can post up. Carmelo can post up. So there has to be a way where you can work them out. I mean, for instance, look at Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. They're honestly really, they talked about it for 2 years. They're the same player. They both are slashers. They're not great jump shooters. They're great defensively, and they get out on the fast break. So why can't Carmelo and Amari? I mean, they're granted, both one is a small forward, one's a power forward, or big man, you could say. But it can work out if they want it to work out, and I think that's where Woodson comes in, and he has to make an offense where both can be incorporated. And if there's times where you want to have them separate, that's fine. But this team has got to. When you have two $21 million a year players, you got to work it out and play them together. You can't tell me that one has to come off the bench. I mean, let's be honest. It is Carmelo Anthony's team, but you have to work it out.
Let's be honest here. We're talking about Carmelo Anthony, the leading shot taker in the NBA this season. I don't really know how much he really deferred to Amari Stoudemire. I mean, if you remember looking at the postseason, I believe he was averaging at least 5 more shots than the next player in the NBA, just for the postseason alone. So, with Carmelo Anthony, the funny thing is, he came into the season saying he wasn't going to shoot as much and he was going to pass more, and he ended up taking the most shots.
I'm glad you brought that up.
So, when I'm looking at Carmelo Anthony, the thing going forward is Amari Stoudemire willing to pass more? Because Carmelo Anthony, he's occasionally going to get the assist. He's not a LeBron James. He's not going to pass the ball. Carmelo's a guy who can hit threes. We saw him go cold a little bit in the series here. He's a guy who can drive to the hoop, hit the jumpers. He can do everything you want offensively. He has some liabilities as a defensive power forward, but he's a little more athletic so he can keep up with them. But I really think going forward, obviously it's going to be tough for the Knicks in order to trade Amari Stoudemire, but they need to get rid of Amari Stoudemire or Tyson Chandler at least to help spread the floor out so they can get more shooters on the court. Leave Carmelo Anthony at that 4 position.
Yeah. I think if you want to keep that small ball lineup, they're going to have to bring in another 3, a natural small 4, a guy who's going to slash, play defense. Somebody like a Matt Barnes I've been thinking about from the Clippers, a guy who's played for under market value the last couple of seasons, and a guy who can hit threes, so that works in Mike Woodson's system, and he can defend, and he can get out on the fast break. So, I mean, if they don't make any major moves, my biggest thing is this is an offseason where Woodson really has to make a stamp, and he has to try to improve every single player. And if you want to go down the list, first off, Carmelo Anthony, he has to, even as Carmelo Anthony is my favorite player, somehow Woodson has to get engraved in Carmelo's mind that he cannot do it alone. I mean, there was times where he did pass, and I know in the past he said that the reason why he would try to do everything himself, but he has to get him to the point where he's passing and getting his teammates more involved than he already has. I mean, he's got to, somebody of Carmelo's nature should average 5 assists a game, I think personally, because he's that good where teams double him and it leaves people wide open. But the one big thing was Paul George was one-on-one with Carmelo, so he didn't allow him to really pass out of double teams. But you have to get him to the point where he has to be able to incorporate. If you can't bring in anybody else to the team right now, you stick with what you have. He's got to be able to incorporate his teammates better.
I believe there was a situation in the Celtics game where Carmelo Anthony wanted to take the shot. He got double-teamed, and he ended up hitting that pass to Kenyon Martin right before the buzzer, and they ended up winning that game. But it was just because he had to. He was doubled, and he couldn't get the shot off, so he ended up throwing it. He's capable of making these passes. No one's saying he's not. It's just he's not willing to do it.
It's a mindset.
I think it's a little different because when you're at the Olympics, you're more willing to do that. And even then, he was still chucking up threes like crazy, and he set records. So that's just the kind of player he is, and the Knicks have to accept it. And going forward, you have to identify what role players do you want in this team. As we saw in the postseason, a guy who was really crucial for them last year and this season, Steve Novak. He really wasn't put into the postseason at all in any of the games against Indiana, and as a result, their 3-point shooting suffered.
Yeah. Obviously, they could have used his shot making, but if you're looking defensive wise, who is he going to defend? He's not going to defend Paul George.
Probably Lance Stevenson, but then again,
he can't defend
Stevenson can slash.
David West. Yeah, so it was a situation where it was offense for defense. Do you want to sacrifice your defense for your offense, or do you want to sacrifice your offense for your defense? It's funny because the biggest issue to me with the Knicks in that series was the offense. They were playing good enough defense to win games. If you give up less than 100 points, or you're giving up 80, 90 points a game, I mean, you should win that game. And in the regular season, you would win that game.
Indiana, though, and they can't score.
Yeah, and my point exactly. So if you're getting enough stops and you can't score, then they put so much pressure on Carmelo Anthony to have to make nothing into something. And I think another big thing with Steve Novak was Chris Copeland, a guy who virtually brings the same game as Novak and is more athletic. He's not great defensively, and that's a big reason why Woodson took so long to put him in, which me and you to this day still question, but is a guy that I think you bring back and you try to get rid, and I would get rid of Novak because you're talking about a guy in Copeland who spreads the floor. He's gonna get better in offseason.
He's a better defender.
He's a better defender, and he's gonna get better as a defender
and more athletic.
Yeah, and Novak. I mean, at this point, it is what it is with Novak. You're not getting. I mean, Copeland is his first year. We know he can hit 3. He can hit any shot, honestly. I think he had 2 30-point games at the end of the season, so he can score. He can rebound. I think that he's virtually going to replace Novak at a cheaper price.
And I think the Knicks basically, they overpaid for Novak this offseason. They saw he was a leading three-point shooter in the NBA. They said, hey, we got to have him on our team. What is our fan base going to say if we don't bring him back? And exactly, he can't play defense. He's a huge liability. Mike Woodson wants a better defensive team. He wants a better ball movement team. Novak's not the kind of guy who's going to swing it. He's the guy who's going to stand there and wait for his shot, and that's about it. And I feel like the Knicks can get trade value for him and get him off their team. He's making $3.75 million, and it can help clear some cap room, so you can bring in another player on this team. But the Knicks have a really big question on their hands because obviously with Chandler and Stoudemire, you got to wonder if either is going to really stay healthy. Kenyon Martin was a huge role player toward the end of the season and in the postseason. He's currently he made the veteran minimum, and he's a free agent now. Do you bring him back? Do you not? We'll talk about that when we come back from the break on the Sports Reporters. We're also going to talk about the conference finals in the NBA, and you're going to find out after the sports update there's going to be a little montage for the Indians, so we're going to talk about them too, so just keep it tuned in.
Sports Replay, located on 1614 Niagara Falls Boulevard in Tonawanda, buys, sells, and repairs new and used sporting goods since 1999. They specialize in hockey, snowboards, skiing, paintball, airsoft, and much, much more. Call in at 716-834-6595. Also on Facebook. Once again, Sports Replay at 1614 Niagara Falls Boulevard, a quarter mile off the 290.
This is the sound of a flat-screen television hurled off a building. Now the new bike your kid wants. These are the things you could have, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Use Energy Star light bulbs and appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
The WBNY 25 is a weekly countdown of the top songs by airplay here on Buffalo's original alternative. I'm Tom Connolly, and each week I'll count down the top 25 songs and tell you a little bit more about the music you love. The WBNY 25, Tuesdays 7 to 9 a.m., rebroadcast Fridays 7 to 9 a.m., only here on 91.3 FM WBNY.
And so it begins.
This is your 91.3 FM 3030 Sports Update. After sitting out the first week of OTAs, the Buffalo Bills had 2 of their offensive weapons back on the field as Stevie Johnson and Scott Chandler returned to their practice field on a limited basis. Johnson returned after sitting out due to a lower back injury, while Chandler is recovering from ACL surgery last December. Both ran routes and caught passes. Joining Johnson and Chandler was second-round draft pick wide receiver Robert Woods, who signed his rookie contract Monday afternoon. The Bills have off this weekend before returning Tuesday for practice. In hockey, the New York Rangers avoided a sweep last night, defeating the Boston Bruins in overtime 4-3. And in the Western Conference, the Los Angeles Kings blanked the San Jose Sharks 3-0 to take a 3-2 series lead, and the Detroit Red Wings also blanked the Chicago Blackhawks 2-0 to take a commanding 3-1 series lead. The shutout marked the first time the Blackhawks went scoreless all season. One game on the ice tonight in the Eastern Conference as the Pittsburgh Penguins look to wrap up their best-of-7 series versus the Ottawa Senators. The Penguins lead that series 3-1. In the NBA, Game 2 tonight in the Eastern Conference Finals as the Miami Heat host the Indiana Pacers. Starting point guard Mario Chalmers is expected to play tonight despite a sore left shoulder. The Heat lead that series 1-0. Game 3 tomorrow night in the Western Conference Finals as the Memphis Grizzlies host the San Antonio Spurs, with the Spurs leading that series 2-0. In the draft lottery, the Cleveland Cavaliers won the first overall pick for the second time in 3 years. They are expected to take prospect Kentucky center Nerlens Noel. This is Aubrey Gibert, and this has been your 3030 Sports Update here on 91.3 FM WBNY.
And now, the Sports Reporters Radio Show on WBNY.
Reynolds swings and drives one up the alley in left center. It gets down for a base hit. Cut off on the track by Ellsbury. Cabrera scores. Brantley coming home. He slides in safely. Stopping at second is Santana, and Mark Reynolds delivers. The pitch swung on, ripped into right field. Base hit, Michael Bourne. That'll score Drew Stubbs. And Michael Bourne has his third consecutive hit in the last 3 innings. A ringing single to right for Bourne. And the Indians have scored 6 in the inning and now lead it 12-3.
That was the Indians from last night's game. Their victory over the Red Sox, 12-3. Big win for the Indians. Currently first place in the AL Central. Terry Francona, as I mentioned, coming back to face his former team at Fenway. Big win for them. Going forward for the Indians, I mean, Lonnie Chisenhall currently in the minor leagues. Still doing a great job up there. Mark Reynolds really surprising people. Not really striking out as much as he used to. He's actually one of the leading home run hitters in the AL currently right now. I believe he's 3rd or 4th. But he's doing a great job there. His batting average is around 270, which is better than what it had been in Baltimore, which is around 200. You have Justin Masterson, who has shown he could be an ace. Zach McAllister also is another player who's really pitched well. And Ubaldo Jimenez, his last 4 starts have really been quality starts. So I like what I see from the Indians. I think they're the most interesting team in the major leagues. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this previously before the season started. I mean, this is a team that made drastic changes over the offseason on the offensive side of the field, you know, bringing in a Nick Swisher, a Mark Reynolds, Drew Stubbs, guys of that nature. So it's coming through for them if you think about it, honestly. Those guys they picked up are really stepping up for them. Michael Bourne at the top of the lineup is hitting over 300. Michael Brantley is really stepping into himself. I told you I thought would be a breakout player. He's hitting over 300. Obviously, the biggest player, like you said, is Mark Reynolds, a guy who's hitting for average, home runs, power, RBIs, and all that. So they're getting clutch hitting. But the biggest thing, obviously, we talked about was not even the offense. It was what was their pitching going to do. And Madison has looked dominant. He looked like an ace after having a bad season last season. He's recovered.
It hasn't been great.
No,
it's a lot better than we thought it was going to be. And as far as the pitching is concerned, I believe they have 3 guys who are around 5 in the ERA, but they're playing better. Ubaldo Jimenez was terrible to start the season. I believe his ERA is currently 6.04. So, I mean, it's still pretty bad, but you look at where it had been before. He's actually had 4 quality starts within a span. Justin Masterson, 2.83 ERA. So he's doing a great job.
Zach McAllister, I think, is a guy that has really stepped up in that 3-hole in the middle. It was expected to be Brett Myers. He hasn't been back since that sore.
Told you it wasn't going to work out for him either.
Yeah, I wasn't really for him, but the McAllister's really stepped up.
8.02 for an ERA. That's terrible.
Yeah,
but
pretty bad.
It's a hard transition when you go from being a relief pitcher back to being a starter. He wasn't used to having to pitch all those innings, and he actually was pitching, I believe, pretty good the first 4 innings of games, but then it would be coming in the 6th inning, and he would start to tire down. The ball would be left over the middle of the plate, and that's when hitters' eyes light up, and they're willing to hit extra base hits and home runs. But speaking about the Indians, you mentioned about the offense, all the players they added. It's really paid off so far, and currently in the MLB, they're first in home runs, 62 as a team. Extra base hits, 166. They're tops there. Batting average is pretty good as a team, 264, which is what you want. They're not there quite yet with stolen bases, but that's a lot in large part due to Michael Bourne being injured and put on the DL at some point. He was a guy who they wanted to rely on there. Lonnie Chisenhall being sent down to the minors. He was another guy who could steal bases. So the real benefit for this Cleveland Indians team was Nick Swisher and how he's really changed the philosophy of this Indians teams. They're taking more pitches, which means they're getting better pitches by taking them.
Yeah, you're talking about a guy in Nick Swisher who's always been a guy who will work the count.
Patient hitter, yeah.
Very patient hitter. I think you're seeing that with a lot of the guys. Carlos Santana is another guy who's really stepped up this year. He's hitting 299 right now. You look at Michael Brantley, a guy who's hitting right behind Swisher, and then even Reynolds behind Brantley has really stepped up. I mean, maybe not so much in terms of the average wise, but he's hitting for power. And Swisher is doing the same as that thing. I think he's hitting 276. And you're talking about a 3, 4, 5, 6 people in the lineup that are not only hitting for power, hitting for average. So that's going to help the rest of the team when you have a guy like Bourne already on base, who's a great leadoff hitter, and then you have a Cabrera who honestly still is not where we want him to be. So that has to be a good sign too. When you're in first place, and pretty much your best infielder is not even at 100% or not hitting where we want him to be. How he's hitting right now.
I believe around the week 1 of May, he was still batting at 200 at the very bottom, but now he started to pick his batting average back up to 253, so he's really been hitting a lot better.
Him and Jason Kipnis.
And while the Indians only have a half-game lead over the Detroit Tigers, it is worth mentioning Nick Swisher didn't really play for 3 games because his wife had a baby, so he was on a leave of absence bereavement list. So he's expected to be back tonight, and obviously they're going against the Boston Red Sox, who have their own issues as well.
A team that was hot beginning of the season has kind of dwindled, pretty much done the opposite of what the Indians have done, and they've kind of started to lose, and the Yankees are in first place right now.
And just looking at the schedule coming up for the Indians, I mean, obviously they're playing a 4-game series with Boston. Coming after that, they'll be going to Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati for 2 games, and Cincinnati they'll be coming back for 2 games. So that'll be a tough series against them. They're one of the hottest teams in Major League Baseball. You look at that NL Central, there's currently the 30-12 St. Louis Cardinals. The Pittsburgh Pirates and Cincinnati Reds are both tied 29-18. Those are 3 of the better records in baseball. So Cincinnati is going to be a tough team for Cleveland going forward. Tampa Bay is a team who they can beat, and they got the Yankees, of course. What I find interesting, though, is when you look at the amount of exposure the Indians are getting, yes, ESPN's talking about them, but they're not really on national TV. And the only game that they're really going to be nationally televised is against the Yankees, which for us Indians fans here, it's really not helpful because we can't watch them anyway because it gets blacked out all the time. But the only time we really can watch them is when they play the Yankees or if they play the Mets. But if you're going to put them on ESPN at the same time, it's like defeats the purpose.
Yeah, they're starting to get exposure now from ESPN and everything. My thing is they've started off great, I believe, the last 2 seasons. I think when they showed the from last year, this year, the comparison, they were pretty much in the same spot right now as they were last season. And even the season before that, they were 30-15, I believe, and they were the best team in the league at that point. And it's really been the second half of the season. But I think a manager like Terry Francona, we talked about how Swisher made a culture change offensively and with the hitting. I think Francona, it's going to be a big difference now with him because you're bringing in a guy who has played in the Boston market where it's so much pressure, and they win.
That pedigree of winning 2 World Series rings, and he broke a curse there, and the Indians have one themselves, the curse of Rocky Calvita.
Yeah, and he's a proven winner, and you can tell he's already had his stamp on this team. He's going for right now. He's not playing for the future. He demoted Lonnie Chisenhall, who was pretty much the starter going into the season, and he's moving Mark Reynolds to third base.
That's because Mark Reynolds has been playing out of his mind, though. The only thing going forward with the Indians is you've seen Yan Gomez playing great at catcher. Is he going to be the starter going forward, and you put Carlos Santana at first base, which we saw them do with Victor Martinez a few years ago, and Lou Marston is the backup catcher? Or do you eventually put Reynolds back at first base or DH in that category, or Nick Swisher DH at first base? They have plenty of options currently, but one player who they need to get rid of is Jason Giambi. He's never been a great fielder, and his batting average is terrible right now, 161. He's the only really blemish in this lineup for the Indians when he has to come in, and he ended up having to play a significant role while Nick Swisher was out, and that's why they ended up losing the series to Detroit.
Yeah, a guy who was brought in for pretty much veteran presence. I believe, like I said, I think the only really flaw is the DH spot, but the DH spot previously was held by Mark Reynolds when Lonnie Chisenhall played third. So it pretty much it fluctuates depending on who you want to play on the field.
Well,
I think you have to keep
getting it now.
Yeah, I mean, even if you want to go with Yan Gomes at catcher, I think you have to keep Swisher in for his defense. He's a great two-way player. He's one of a few great two-way players, and maybe put Santana at DH because you have to keep his bat in the lineup hitting 300. So if you did that, like you said, then it would negate Giambi from playing DH. So I think it all depends on the matchups and what Francona likes based on the numbers.
If I were the Indians manager, Terry Francona, I would put Carlos Santana at first base and have Nick Swisher play DH and have them go back and forth on that, and put Yan Gomes at catcher because so far he's played 19 games. He already has 5 home runs and 12 RBIs. So, I mean, he's displayed the power. We saw he's had some big games against Detroit and Seattle. Obviously, that series there. Mike Avils has been getting a little bit more playing time lately in the field. So, yeah, going forward, if I'm the Indians, I mean, Jason Giambi came cheaply. There's no point in playing him anymore. He's not going to get you really on base that often. I mean, he might get a few walks here and there, but I'm not afraid of Jason Giambi if I'm an opposing pitcher. He's like above 40 years old now.
Yeah, not much of a threat at this point. but this is a guy that can, supply some pop. I think he's got a couple home runs, so a guy who can, occasionally hit the home run, get a couple RBIs in, but obviously is probably the weakest spot in the lineup but in what we can probably say, which is a great lineup right now, and the pitching is doing just enough to get them through. I think McAllister really established himself as a third pitcher. It really helps them out a lot. And then I think they have Corey Kluber as their 4 guy.
I'm curious to see whether or not they're going to stick with him and Scott Kazmir going forward. I mean, both of them have pitched better of late. Their ERA is still pretty high. I mean, if you have an ERA above 5, you're on the watch. And you look at what Trevor Bauer did while he was here. He had a 2.76 ERA. He's currently in Columbus right now. You have him, Carlos Carrasco, and Francisco Lindor. All 3 of those guys knocking on the door, looking to get an opportunity at the bigs. So I think the window of opportunity for those 3 pitchers is very small. They have to start pitching a lot better, and I feel like they feel the pressure of that. Ubaldo knows he has the job because of how much money he's making. They're not going to cut him, and good luck trying to trade him. But going forward, there's a lot of reason to be happy about this team, excited about this team. The question is the health, obviously. Can they keep going forward? But I like the leadership they have with Terry Francona, his pedigree, his confidence. I feel like going forward with the veteran leadership they also have, they're going to be a team that's going to contend for the postseason, maybe make that 5th or 4th spot. I'm not willing to say they're going to win the division, not with Miguel Cabrera playing the way he is, again, MVP level. He could win a Triple Crown for the 2nd straight year.
Yeah, I know he was doing good, but as I'm looking up he's hitting 391, excuse me.
And the next highest is James Loney at 350.
14 home runs, 55 RBIs, 13 doubles. He's got 72 hits and 184 at-bats. I mean, in my opinion, let's look at it. 358, you said, is the second best average. That's over 30 points.
That's Joey Votto, yeah. That's in the NL.
RBIs, 55 at 22.
And the next highest is 44, and that's Chris Davis.
Home runs, 14. He's not necessarily. I think Davis is leading the home runs. But, look at the disparity in the
Detroit
RBIs.
is loaded with talent as far as hitters are concerned. Andy Dirks has been leading off lately because of injuries to the team. But you have him. You have Prince Fielder, who we knew was going to be a big acquisition for them. He's really starting to pan out. They still have Johnny Peralta, who's a home run hitting shortstop. They also have Austin Jackson, who I believe is injured currently at this moment.
Yes.
So they have plenty of talent. The only problem with the Detroit Tigers is going to be their pitching going forward. Justin Verlander hasn't been the same AL Cy Young kind of pitcher, but you figure after April or May, he'll start to really come in his own and become a better pitcher going forward.
I think it's going to be a two-team race between the Indians and the Tigers.
Yeah, the White Sox surprisingly just aren't in it.
Yeah, and then I know a lot of people were saying Kansas City before, but I think if you talk about a straight-up balanced team, I think the Indians and the Tigers are the 2 best teams in AL Central in terms of hitting and pitching. Both had their flaws in pitching, so I think it'll come down to what team pitches better down the stretch and whose bullpen comes through. The team who has
experience, though, is the Detroit Tigers, and that's going to be a key going forward. The Indians are still a young team while they have added some veteran leaders. It's going to be interesting to see who wins that series, but you mentioned Kansas City. They're a really young team. They signed a bunch of pitchers this offseason. Obviously, the big one was James Shields. He's going to be crucial for them going forward. They're currently 21-23. So we'll see what happens there in the Central. But I just wanted to pay a little homage to Adam Wainwright in St. Louis before we talk about the NBA. Have you seen his strikeout to walk ratio yet?
I have not. I can look at it though.
69 strikeouts, 6 walks.
That's a good
this is the
ratio.
guy
That's a pretty good ratio. I will say that.
Who's a year removed, or 2 years removed now, from Tommy John surgery.
Yeah. So obviously that year off helped him out a lot. A guy who, before that I thought was an ace easily. It's kind of funny how they lost him and had Carpenter, then they get Wainwright back and lose Carpenter again. So imagine those two actually played in the same season together. How much better St. Louis would be.
They lost Albert Pujols, and yet they're still one of these great teams in the MLB you have to respect. They're a team who's always in the postseason hunt. They have Matt Holliday, who was a big transaction there, but they're getting it all around. Alan Craig is 5th in RBIs in the NL. You have other players like Rafael Furcal, who they lost this season. Pete Cosman stepped in and done a great job there too. So St. Louis is going to be a team to watch out for in the NL Central. I just wanted to mention it. Adam Wainwright's my fantasy team, so I've been paying attention to these kind of numbers. But
if you're going to talk about pitching, you know I got to bring him up.
Do it.
Mr. Harvey. Matt Harvey from the Mets. The big guy, the big prospect. I believe, was he the guy they acquired for Carlos Beltran from San Fran?
No.
It wasn't okay. But obviously it was a prospect.
Zach Wheeler.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Yes,
he's
I'm
in
sorry.
The
I was going to say, wow, what a dud by San
he's
Fran.
in Las Vegas now. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say that was a big dud by San Fran.
Speaking of which, before we go to basketball, do you know who's pitching for the Bisons on Saturday?
I do not.
Josh Johnson.
Is he? Oh, is a DL?
He's on rehab.
Rehab stint.
For the
okay.
Blue Jays.
So that would be interesting to see if you want to go out to the game and see them play.
The interesting thing about the Bison, I just want to bring this up. They have Ricky Romero and Dustin McGowan on this roster right now.
Ricky Romero's on the Bisons?
Yeah.
He's not even playing with Toronto.
And you said he was going to be a great pitcher this year.
He was their ace last year. That shows you how much depth, or I guess how many moves Toronto made when you have a guy who was your ace last year and is now on the minor league team. And his
ERA was terrible.
My opinion, he's good enough to be in the majors. Maybe not as ace as he was, but he's a 4 or 5 starter, right? I would take him on any of the 4 or 5.
5+ ERA pitcher at this point now. He just leaves the ball over the middle of the plate, and that's why he's in Buffalo. But again, you have to check out the Bisons and see where Ricky Romero's at to see whether or not you think he's a guy who qualifies as an MLB pitcher or if he's a minor leaguer at this point. But we're going to go to the NBA Conference Finals. Miami taking on the Indiana Pacers tonight. You saw what happened in Game 1. Paul George, huge three-pointer, huge free throws, yet it still wasn't enough to get the job done as he had poor defense on LeBron James for that easy layup to win the game.
Do you put that? Let me ask you this question because I'm tired of hearing it, but I just want to hear your opinion. Do you think that play happens if Roy Hibbert's in the game?
I don't.
I agree. I agree totally.
But here's the thing: if LeBron drives in, what are the likelihood that he gets fouled?
They would have called the foul.
Exactly. So he would have had 2 free throws anyway.
Is he going to make them? Because we've seen in the past, LeBron does not make clutch free throws, and he avoids shooting free throws purposely because he doesn't want that pressure on him.
See, and that's the thing. You knew he wasn't going to take a jump shot because he's afraid of the pressure. But if you have him do a layup, he's going to make it. It's not really that hard to make a layup.
And that's my biggest thing, and that's why you have to put that on Paul George. As many clutch plays as you said as he made, I think I tweeted, for a guy that made 2 clutch plays, he made a bonehead play at the end of the game. There's no way you overplay LeBron James. Why would you overplay him? There's no. You only have 2.5. I think it was 2.3 seconds. So he has to catch it, either shoot or go.
Well, if you watch the replay again, it looks like Paul George is looking
to deny the ball.
Yeah, to jump to try to block the shot or try to get a hand in his face at least. And obviously that split second, LeBron took advantage.
LeBron's too big and fast.
Drove to the left and put the layup up, and obviously it ended up costing Indiana. I don't think this series is over by any means. I mean, they only won by a point. And I feel like if Indiana can win Game 2, I'm not saying they're going to. If they can, I think this will be a series that can go 7.
The way they lost, that to me, they lost series right there. I had them losing already. But if you go into Miami and win Game 1, I mean, Chicago did the same exact thing. But they're not Chicago. They have scorers. They have big-time guys. That is a game you have to win. I mean, plus,
Dwayne Wade was fouled out. And
yeah.
LeBron James had 5 fouls. How often are you going to be in that scenario?
And, I mean, obviously, as the road team, you have to win one road game already. But to go for Paul George, I mean, I don't know where his psyche is right now. I hope he didn't lose any of it off of that. And I know he deferred.
He didn't seem like it.
Yeah, he said that he blamed Hibbert for that, which I think is preposterous to blame Hibbert. But
no, he said that next time he would have put Hibbert in the game.
I don't think Hibbert makes a difference in 2.1 seconds, though.
He was more calling out Frank Vogel for taking out Hibbert.
But I mean, if you're Paul George, you got to realize that with 2.1 seconds left, that LeBron, all he can do is take the ball and make one move. And if he makes a contested jump shot, I live with that. I can't live with an open layup like that. My jaw dropped. That he was, and like LeBron said, everybody was saying that LeBron's clutch. He said himself, I've been making layups since the 8th grade. It wasn't a clutch play. It was a great play by him, a great move. He saw that.
It wasn't a great play.
It wasn't a great play.
It surprised everybody that it was that easy.
It was a smart move because
he
got overplayed.
And you just saw Paul George to get into overtime making that huge three-pointer. And then you go and see an easy play like this by LeBron James. I mean,
and I mean, you can obviously see that Miami is not as healthy. Dwayne Wade clearly is not healthy, but he's going out there and giving them all he can give them. But that kind of game, to lose like that, let's look at, for instance, back in the round two when Golden State was up by 15 or some points on San Antonio in that first game. That's a game they lost a series, right? If they win that game, it's a whole. I have to think that series goes 7, because you lose a game. I mean, they did come back and recover and win game 2, but when you have a game locked up like that, you have to win it. Not saying that Indiana had it locked up, because LeBron could have easily caught the ball, shot it, and gone in. The probability of him doing that versus him going to the bucket, I would take my chances with him shooting a jump shot.
Let's face it, Miami is the best team in basketball. There's no argument with this, because they have 3 of the top 5 superstars in the league. Or I don't know if you want to call Chris Bosh top 5. Maybe you want to go.
He's a top 15, 20 player. Top 15, 20 player. You have Ray Allen, the best 3-point shooter in the league.
But you look at what Indiana did that game. They were able to stay with them the entire game. I don't know if they can do that going forward. I mean, obviously, the Miami Heat are well-rested. They're not really going to be worried about it. The best thing that the Pacers can really do is to hard foul the players on the Heat and hope you get something done. The only thing is, with the Heat, they have so much depth. I mean, they have Ray Allen coming off the bench. Norris Cole having a big role stepping up. We haven't even got to Rashard Lewis yet.
Yeah. I don't think necessarily the Pacers have to go like the Knicks did and try to play Indiana's game in terms of trying to hard foul them, because I think they obviously know they're the more physical team than Miami. Miami knows that Indiana's a more physical team. I think Indiana can stay with them, but in terms of that game 1, my thing with Miami is Miami's going to make adjustments, and they're going to come out better than they did that game before. They look at the film, they see what they had to do, and the biggest thing with me with Indiana is people are going to have to step up for Paul George, because of the fact that you can't ask Paul George to score 25 points a night and guard LeBron James, because he's going to give up something either way.
He's not Kevin Durant.
Yeah. He's not if you want him to play, he's not going to lock down LeBron, don't get me wrong, but if you want him to play great defense on LeBron, you can't expect him to be on the offensive side of the court and score. Maybe if he was a great shooter, yes, but you can't expect that from a guy who just got the most improved player of the year, because he wasn't even that good last year. But he's definitely stepping himself into a superstar mode. At first, I was totally against that, but from what I've seen in Game 1, he's definitely, showcasing himself against the best team in the league. So he's definitely getting to that superstar mode. But I think it's going to have to be other players like David West is going to have to dominate his matchup on Shane Battier.
Well, they
that
did.
is a matchup you have.
Well,
he did.
George had 27, West had 26, and Hibbert had 19.
He's got to continue that, though. That has to be every single night. Hibbert and West have to combine for 40 points every night.
The big difference between this series and the series against the Knicks is obviously the Pacers. They want to work it inside, which they're doing successfully. The only thing is they're not hitting 3-pointers like they were against the Knicks. They were only 4 of 14 in this game against Miami.
Because they're not double teaming.
Yeah.
The Knicks double teamed way too much. If you play, and it made the offense so predictable for Indiana, where it was like, okay, let's just dump it down to West, double team, pass out, move the ball, hit 3. If you're not, and that's the biggest thing. That's the thing that the Knicks thrive themselves on. But when you don't double Carmelo and everything's 1-on-1, then nobody's open. And Miami is not double teaming. They have Udonis Haslem down low. They have LeBron. They don't need to double team. And if they score, okay, they'll score. But you don't want to get everybody else on the team in rhythm, like I told you before. You don't want a DJ Augustine, a Sam Young, a Lance Stevenson, guys who you don't expect to take over games to be in the rhythm. You can live with Paul George, Roy Hibbert, and David West. You can expect them to score the chunk of the load, or George Hill also. But you don't want to get them other guys in rhythm, because then that's when that team becomes dangerous. And that's why they were so successful versus the Knicks, because of the double teaming. Everybody got involved.
And I think we can agree that the most valuable player in that game for the Miami Heat was Birdman, Chris Anderson.
Great game.
Because he had a great game off the bench. He ended up having 16 points, did a great job defensively. Just going forward for this series, obviously the Miami Heat are a fast-paced team. They like to do a lot of fast breaks. They're going to try to run the court more. I think they're willing to give Hibbert or West 20 points a night. I think they're willing to do it because they know that they can get down the court fast and get points. It's just a matter of it's going to be three-pointer, drive to the hoop, layup, whatever, jump shot.
Yeah, I had Miami in 6. I'm going to stick with that. If Indiana had won, maybe I would have changed it, because I wouldn't expect Indiana to win game 1. But, obviously, they have to win one of those games to win this
I
series.
have Miami sweeping or winning in 5. I'm going to be bold. I'm bold.
Indiana's too good of a team to get swept.
I think you're saying that because
they're too good of a team.
I think you're saying it because
you're talking about a team that almost won game one with a layup away.
You want to believe that because you're a Knicks fan and you saw the Knicks struggle against the Pacers. But if Miami ends up sweeping them, Miami's just that great of a team.
I don't think they're good. I don't think they're. Indiana's not a team. While they're not a flashy team, they're not a team that's going to get embarrassed or blown out unless you just hit jump shots like crazy, because they play great defense and they play a brand of basketball that you really can't get blown out, but it's not a flashy type of basketball.
Miami only made 3-pointers too.
Yeah, but the fact is, can you stop LeBron? That's the difference. He gets to the hole whenever he wants to.
LeBron's going to get 25 easily every night.
Easily.
So the question is, how do you stop Dwayne Wade? How do you stop Chris Bosh? Try to make the role players try to beat you. And I think Indiana has a chance that way. Just going forward, I just think that Miami has too much scoring power on this team, and Indiana can't keep up with them. Last series I want to talk about before we go to the break, because this series will probably be over before we get to the next show. It'll be Memphis and San Antonio. Spurs currently up 2-0 on the Grizzlies. What are your thoughts on the series so far?
Well, first of all, let me say they're up 2-0 Oklahoma City last year before losing 4 straight. Don't see that happening again. I had Memphis originally in 6. I'm gonna go with San Antonio in 5 now, because they've just looked dominant. I expect for Memphis to come out and really play hard tomorrow night. Zach Randolph has struggled mightily. I mean, nobody expected that.
Game 1 he did. Game 2 he backed it up.
Yeah, game 1 was horrible. Marc Gasol really hasn't. I mean, Tim Duncan has dominated a matchup that I thought the other team would, dominate. So Parker, and I mean, they're really moving the ball. Parker, I mean, I think Ginobili only averaging like 7.5 points in the 2 games, and they're still beating you by. I mean, it took a miraculous comeback in game 2 for Memphis to even get to overtime, but
depth,
just too much. Yeah, just too much depth for San Antonio. The ball movement, the way their offense flows, it's so hard to defend. And on offense, you have to do the same thing. You have to make the extra pass, like Oklahoma City did to beat them, and you have to make jump shots. And Memphis is not a jump shooting team. They're virtually the same team as Indiana. If you really look at it, they have 2 dominant big men down low, good, not great point guards.
Well, the difference is they don't have a Paul George.
They don't have a Paul. You're right. They had a Rudy Gay, but it didn't work out with Zach Randolph. So Tayshaun Prince gives you defense, but gives you virtually no offense.
They have one player who come off the bench, Jared Bayless, who can hit some points. I mean, he had a big game 2 for them, and obviously helped them stay alive. But going forward, I mean, you look at San Antonio, they just have way too much depth, as we mentioned. They have one of the best point guards in the game, Tony Parker. Tim Duncan, who's old, he's well rested right now and still playing like an all-star. Kawhi Leonard is a great job of doing defense. You have Manu Ginobili, who's back to who he used to be.
Danny Green hitting 3-point shots.
And Danny Green hitting 3-point shots. It's just a series where Memphis met their match. There's a team who has more depth than they do. They can afford to foul people like Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol. And Gasol's not going to get those easy shots he did against Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I agree with you. I think San Antonio wins in 5 as well. So that will wrap up the Sports Reporters Radio Show. Next week, we may or may not talk Knicks. If I can get my friend from ESPN New York, Ian Begley, on our show, I'm going to try. If not, then we'll probably talking about the conference finals, maybe the finals if we get to that point. Who knows at this point. And we'll probably end up talking a little bit more about baseball, maybe some NFL talk, because, we've talked about the Bills nonstop, but there are 31 other teams in this league. So
RG3 coming back, so we have. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of news by next week.
Oh yeah, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Michael Vick says he's the fastest quarterback in the NFL still.
I agree. There's no argument about it. Did you see the 40 time?
Yeah.
No argument.
All right. So that'll wrap up the Sports Reporters Radio Show. I'm the host, AJ Speier, alongside Aubrey Gibert, signing out.